We don't have audio, though. Hey, Wes, we don't have the audio.
We having trouble?
Yeah, we can see the video. We don't have the audio. Did you?
Oh, I forgot. Yep,
Yeah.
sorry, I forgot to hit the button.
Yep.
Let's go back. Where's the button? All right. Stop sharing. Include sound this time. Let's try again.
There we go.
Because of changes in climate, Ballard will become not only a migration site, but likely be responsible for wintering more and more waterfowl. Ballard's notoriety has historically been as a Canada goose area, and for a variety of reasons, including changing land use and agricultural practices, those geese winter at higher latitude. So Ballard Wildlife Management Area is reinventing itself as a duck area to provide duck habitat and duck hunting opportunities. Reinventing Ballard is a three-part approach to managing water, managing waterfowl habitat, and managing waterfowl hunters. The change from a centralized goose refuge and dry field hunting opportunities to interspersed moist soil and flooded timber opportunities are necessary for that change. Being situated along the Ohio River, very subject to flooding, Ballard tends to get more water when it doesn't need it and not have adequate water when it does. Replacing small, inadequately sized structures with large capacity structures to move floodwaters off of the site and installing sizable pump systems to provide water for waterfowl and waterfowl hunters when water is less available. We're only now in the early stages of what over the next 10 years or so will be a complete revitalization and reinvention of Ballard Wildlife Management Area.
All right. Am I back on my presentation now?
Yes, you are.
All right, good deal. I've got my notes. All right, so I was asked to talk about our management efforts here in Kentucky, and obviously we don't have enough time to cover everything that we do statewide. Across the state, the regions have their own small projects that happen, every year. I saw Brian Gray on the chat. He's built dozens of little small wetlands on the WMA that he used to manage before he abandoned ship and started living a life of leisure. But I am going to talk about our biggest priority in wetland management, which would be the Western Kentucky Waterfowl Initiative and our partnership with Ducks Unlimited. So for the purposes of this talk and for the department, you're going to hear the terms waterfowl management and wetland management basically interchangeably. And so before I get into specific details of our Kentucky efforts, I want to give a quick rundown on the history of waterfowl management, wetland management, and how it occurred in the U.S. So we only have two types of game birds in Kentucky. We have the glorified chickens, and then we have migratory birds. There's one major question that has to be asked, what's the difference in managing these two birds? And the glorified chickens, they're just going to be here. Migratory birds, they're going to breed far to our north. They're going to go through Kentucky, head south to the wintering grounds. Migratory birds must be managed both national scale, local scale, everything in between. So if we were in person, I would see y'all getting nervous with a slide like this, but don't worry, we'll get back to the fun stuff here pretty shortly. I just kind of wanted to cover a couple of key legislative actions that have happened through the years to bring us to where we are now. And the years of unregulated hunting and unchecked wetland clearing, it took tolls on waterfowl populations. And some of these, legislative wins were just absolutely critical to get us where we are now. Migratory birds now are considered a shared resource, and they're managed as such. Management rights were given to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Canadian Wildlife Service. Historically, wetlands and waterfowl would have just been managed locally. There would have been very little thought given to how the money you spend in your state impacts the life cycle of the birds. So not the most efficient way to work. Along the lines, the administrative flyway boundaries were formed, and this brought the administrators of state agencies, provinces, the feds, people that can influence their budget and can actually write a check. Those people needed to be sitting at the same table and discussing these issues. So the establishment of the the waterfowl flyways, that was a big step on the way to creating a good plan that can be stepped down into the local regions. So also we had banding programs and population surveys that popped up. We heard some mentions of the BPOP and some banding stuff earlier today, but these tools really are the most critical tools that we have to determine population sizes and the effects of harvest. So along through the years, we've had some big wins. But in 1986, we finally received the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, and this was one of the biggest pieces of legislation that has ever happened. This is the plan that we manage by today, and it established international goals with emphasis on local scale projects and ranked those out by importance. The joint ventures were established through the service. They identify the critical habitats and the individual flyways, and basically pick projects that are needed to better the good for the entire joint venture area. So they play a critical role of setting our goals here in Kentucky. We're a flyover state. Most of our waterfowl species just pass through. We do have some breeders here, but the vast majority of our waterfowl and migratory bird species, they just pass through. So our focus is on wintertime food. Now, we use a couple terms, and I'm not going to get into the science of duck use days or duck energy days, but those are our goals. We need so many duck use days or duck energy days, and that's basically just a calculation of the amount of food necessary for a mallard-sized duck to survive on a given acre of habitat. So that's a mouthful to say how much food is there. So flooded crops, moist soil vegetation, and flooded timber, that's the three major habitat types that we manage here in Kentucky. But hopefully everywhere that we are actively managing, we're not managing passively. So one of the things that I've learned through the years is you can put as much into something as you want to, and generally the more you put in, the more you get out. Now, whether you're sitting on your bucket for 10,000 hours or you're out there disking and then sitting on the bucket, or spraying a little, then sitting on the bucket, you learn a lot by being out there and trying new things. So the goals set by the joint ventures, it's how much food do we have in the wintertime to get these birds through the critical migration cycle and get them back to the breeding grounds fat and healthy, ready to lay eggs. So in 1989, the North American Wetland Conservation Act came about, and this was passed to kind of support the NAWAMP. NAWCA provides a strategy for the long-term protection of wetland habitats, and basically the grants that come out of the NAWCA they're administered by Ducks Unlimited, who use the NAWAMP goals to rank projects by importance. So this is the largest effort to put wetland habitat back on the ground in the U.S. So back to Kentucky. So we have our Western Kentucky Waterfowl Initiative. It was created a few years ago, and we started forming some goals here and there. The video that I showed you highlighted our partnership with Ducks Unlimited. Without them, without NAWCA, we could not afford to do what we're doing. So here's a map that is kind of the focus of the Western Kentucky Waterfowl Initiative. This is about a 15 to 20 mile radius, and that's about the expected distance that you would, what you would expect a mallard duck to fly around in a day. They can go that far, they can go farther, but this is a good average of one duck waking up one morning. He might move from one spot to the next in this little window here. And what you can see is there is a lot of wetland focused wildlife management areas, and there's a lot of permanent wetland easements. Those are those red blocks that Kathy was talking about earlier, the WRP and the WRE programs. There's a lot of wetland habitat either managed or permanently protected in this block, and it was a good place to focus our efforts. So with every good plan, you got to have a good flow chart. This initiative began with the Fish and Wildlife Commissioner and the Commission back in 2016, and they put this steering team together to kind of basically the plan was we got to get staff in place to be the most effective. So the steering team members, that's those check writers that I mentioned, the folks that have the ability to influence their budgets. So we have the KDFWR Commissioner and the Commission. We have Ducks Unlimited Director of Conservation Programs and any funding partner that wants to throw money our way. So next we'd have our regional planning teams, and that's going to be a mix of administrative staff, field staff, engineering staff, both Fish and Wildlife and Ducks Unlimited sit on this. And this team basically sets goals and see that they are accomplished. And finally, though, we're going to get down to our implementation teams, and this is where the gears grind and things happen. With each goal, smaller teams are put together to oversee work on the ground. And one thing that we quickly learned as we were trying to set goals is we had absolutely no idea what sort of infrastructure was in place and functioning on our WMAs. You basically had one WMA manager and maybe one technician that had been there for enough years to know what's going on. But besides those two people, there was nobody in the agency that can have an educated conversation about what they do from day to day with waterfowl or wetland management. So our first goal was to inventory everything we have: levees, pumps, wells, structures for water control. We needed a GIS coverage for that, and that way I can talk to somebody here at Frankfort about what they're doing on Ballard WMA or Boatwright WMA or Sloughs WMA. And one thing we quickly learned is that everything we had was outdated or failing. So we had a lot of old infrastructure. So you'll also see on this screen this public sounding board. We learned real quick that when you make changes on WMAs, it helps if the public is involved. If you just make a change, you're going to ruin somebody's life. It always happens. You're never going to make everybody happy. But if you put a public sounding board together, the idea of this is a public partnership to ensure that the local needs are considered. You know, when we manage, we're mostly thinking about our WMA users because that's the people we interact with the most and the people that we want to see succeed on our WMAs. But there, you know, there's other perspectives out there. Everything we do impacts the resource, and the resource is used by our WMA users and the neighbors. So these sounding boards are a great way to give us another perspective to consider when we start into planning. So from here, we got our baseline inventory set. We've got a little sounding board, somebody to bounce some ideas off of. The next goal was to set up this wetland review team and figure out what our goals are or what that even means. So our early accomplishments are set up here. Basically, the wetland review is what we were trying to get to. So what is a wetland review? Ducks Unlimited, I've used this wetland review process for many years to plan and prioritize management actions on WMAs. It basically gets wetland managers to sit down together and discuss ways to improve your current plan. Generally, when you're talking about WMAs, they're in their own little world. You know, they've got some oversight, but their day-to-day operations are with the same people, and it's easy to get in a rut. It's real easy because you got your friends at other WMAs, but they're not going to step on your toes. But you sit down in a room together and you start talking about each other's problems and what's worked and what hasn't. Everybody learns. So we started to plan for a review at Ballard WMA. We'd had some success with Sloughs at Sloughs WMA on a smaller scale, but we're wanting to go bigger. So back to Ballard. If you're not familiar with Ballard WMA, it's about 8,000 acres. All but 800 acres of that thing goes underwater. If you pull up Google Earth right now, it'll show about 800 acres of dry ground. Everything else is underwater. Now, that doesn't happen every year, but about 50% of it can expect to see some floodwater in a given year. It's about 50% timber, 20% of it is managed water, which is a lot. So one of the goals that came out through the Western Kentucky Waterfowl Initiative was we wanted to update the Ballard management plan. Basically, we had been managing Ballard the same way for the last 50 years. It used to be the goose hunting capital of the world. I've heard Sloughs folks say that same thing, but the Sloughs and Ballard WMA shared one thing in common. They don't have Canada geese anymore. They just don't come this far south. So historically, our hunters were goose hunters, and occasionally they would bag a duck. Now we have duck hunters that occasionally bag geese, and so it's time to change our ways. So through the wetland review process, we hope to learn from other states, other managers, anybody that we can talk to And if nothing else, just find out, are we alone in this problem, or are they having it too? So like I said, we aim big, tried to get as many wetland experts as possible in the room. We went through the flyway. We invited coordinators, state coordinators, invited WMA guys gals from other states. The thought was, if we invite 50, maybe we'll get 20, but we ended up with, we invited 40 and got 50 people almost. So 49 separate participants showed up, 14 entities were representative, but the big take home from it was when we sat down, we had 659 years of wetland and waterfowl experience in one room to discuss the future of Ballard WMA. So that was a big meeting to kind of get your hands on and to keep out of the weeds. So we got a meeting facilitator who was trained, how to go through individual exercises and keep everybody on track. We heard multiple presentations about, moist soil management. Ducks Unlimited engineering and biologists presented a wetland review success story. Like I said, they've used this process for years, but it had never been done at this size. And then we had some Missouri guys come over and share some of their hunt strategies to compare with what we're doing here in Kentucky. And, everybody had ArcGIS online maps sent out to them so they can get familiar with the place. It's hard to just sit down in a room and be able to take off running. You need some homework done. So everybody did that. I mean, everybody showed up with a general idea of what we were working with. And then we had ArcMap going at the meeting as well. So we spread everybody out into groups. Multiple disciplines were distributed evenly throughout the groups. You had state waterfowl coordinators, regional coordinators, other regional staff, private lands, public land staff. We had USDA NRCS showed up. You can see Kathy Terry was there. She spoke earlier. We had a lot of different groups, and we kind of just spread everybody out as evenly as possible and started giving them a bunch of small scale tasks to, get some ideas popping. And a lot of ideas came out of this thing. This was one of the best wins that we've had in the state. Each group was given these small tasks, but eventually it boiled down to, here's a blank slate, give us a management plan. Money's no issue. All we want to know is what your priorities are and how would you accomplish your goals. So all the groups did that. They had to, after a couple days, they had to present. And the most amazing thing is, every single group that we had basically came up with the exact same idea, just a few different ways to implement it. We knew our structures and everything. Our big pump that we have was outdated. We knew that our management plan was set up for goose hunting, and that's totally different. With goose hunting, you need a gigantic refuge and a bunch of small hunting units for the geese to fly out of this big giant refuge and hunters to have access to them. With ducks, it's completely different. So if you give them too much refuge, they will never leave it. So these groups sat down, they started drawing lines. This should be refuge. This should be a hunt unit. We need some more infrastructure, updated here. And it was just a wonderful exercise to get our head wrapped around where we were and where we needed to be. So, as I said, it was a huge win for the state. We also learned that this was useful across the flyway. The feds, I think, started a wetland review process amongst their refuge staff to bring in refuges from all over the southeast, basically, to sit down. The northern folks said we can get the same kind of benefits by putting a regional team of experts that annually might meet. Of course, then we had COVID hit. We had plans to do what we did at Ballard, immediately go to boat ride, immediately go to Doug Travis, head up to sloughs. But, we're kind of in a holding pattern now. So back to that steering team I mentioned earlier. So while we were working through the wetland review process, we were mapping our infrastructure, we were addressing our immediate needs. Well, the steering team was out there finding money for us to spend. And that brings us to Pecan Grove. This is a little small field at Ballard WMA. It was a project that had been in the hopper for some time, but we'd never really had the money to do it. It was one of those things that it'd be great if we ever got to it, but it just was, it wasn't, the funding wasn't there from our day-to-day activities. We just couldn't afford it. So the steering team came up with a donation. They wanted to see something done. And we had this little project, and it's not a change the world project, but I'll point out here, you see this open field. If I can get my laser pointer to work, this is just a big crop fields. All this is. It had one little small levee and a small little hole of water. Not, we got some engineering on the ground. The plan was to improve habitat, but the biggest win is we wanted to show our investors that we could put the donations to good use. State government is not known for speed. We were able to turn this one around quickly. which went a long way in solidifying the relationships with those donors. So I mentioned the engineering. We've got LiDAR coverage out there at Ballard. So we just drew a few lines. We already had an engineer that had looked this over, and we were ready to throw another 25 or 30 acres on the ground. Worked out wonderfully. Flew over it last year. You can see this was that original hole of water. It had a little small dike. We were able to extend that out here, put another levee at the topo line there. So now we got a 30-acre hole of water, and we were also able to add a little bit to the stuff down in here. So, you know, like I said, not a change the world project, but a really, really good looking project. And it got the dollars rolling in. Our donors, they wanted to work with Fish and Wildlife, but, you know, for years, we've just kind of been spinning our wheels. So this showed them that we had something to work with. So while we were putting our Ballard plan together, we started with that NAWCA process that I mentioned, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. Those grants, by partnering with Ducks Unlimited, we put a plan together to basically, we want to roll a NAWCA grant into Kentucky every couple of years if possible. What we were going to do is have a lot of these planned improvements that are kind of been on the back burner waiting on money. We got a list of those now, and so when there's money available, we'll start pulling the trigger. And one of the first ones we did was a moist soil unit on Doug Travis, the Twin Ponds unit of Doug Travis, and you can see the structure that was put in there and these nice pretty levees. This gave us time to spend a little more money while we were getting our ducks in a row, so to speak, at Ballard WMA. You know, Doug Travis, just like Ballard WMA, they had some old infrastructure that needed replacing. You know, we all want to see these big, sexy new wetland projects, but quite often we just need help replacing the structures that we have. You only get about 15 years out of this thing and these things here. And whenever we did our infrastructure review, we found out real quick that a lot of the stuff we had was 25, 30, 40 years old. So a long-term plan was put in place, and we laid out our major goals. So this is Ballard WMA, and this is a lot to look at, so just bear with me just a second. But priority one, we needed a new Ohio River pump. That's a huge goal. A river pump's going to cost somewhere between $4 and $5 million. So we have an old pump. It's located right here. This thing, it was put in, I don't know how many years ago, but it just doesn't function properly anymore. Years and years of wear and tear. It doesn't put out enough gallons per minute. It's in a bad spot. So if you look, Ballard's 8,000 acres. There's about 4,000 acres up here and 4,000 acres down here. Right now, we have to back water up all of this. You see all these lines. We're sending water down a ditch and slowly flooding all this before we can turn and send it back downhill. So we're wasting a lot of duck food every year when you have to fill these wetlands to maximum capacity just to be able to send it back down through the rest of the WMA. So a closer look at that. We've got a plan for a new river pump. It'll go right here. So we'll be able to send water slowly downhill. It will be a new efficient pump. Right now, when we turn that thing on right there, it's full power or no power. It's $15,000 a month in electricity that we have to spend to turn that thing on and run it. The new pump systems that are designed now, you know, you can run up just a little bit of water or a whole lot of water. It's whatever you need. And they're a lot easier to clean out and keep running for years and years than they used to be. We also have these large reservoirs on Ballard WMA that were in severe need of new infrastructure. This is the front slough. It's part of the refuge and kind of the showpiece of Ballard WMA. That's the first thing you see when you come in. It had a small little pipe right there to drain that whole thing. We've also got Shelby Lake, which runs off the WMA and continues across a lot of private land. We have Mitchell Lake down here, Butler and Castor, all these little big interior lakes. All of it had these little structures with 18 and 24-inch pipes that just were not enough to handle the amount of water that we manage. So I mentioned front slough. You saw in that video when the egrets were flying across, I don't know if you noticed, but that's, like I said, the first thing you see when you get to the WMA. It was completely choked out with American lotus and buttonbush, because not only is this a 200-acre impoundment drained by an 18-inch pipe, it's also at the very bottom of a 2,000 to 3,000 acre watershed. So every drop of water in that 2,000 to 3,000 acre watershed ends up here. And what that means is with a 24-inch pipe, you're not draining the thing. And therefore, it's basically a lake, not an impoundment. And it was full of buttonbush and American lotus, which is very low production of duck food. So Through the partnership with Ducks Unlimited, these NACA grants that I was mentioning, our first major project was to improve the front slough water control structure. We removed that small pipe and put in a structure that can handle that much water. Now, I know a lot of y'all, you dealt with water control structures. You're thinking aggregate drain or maybe a 24-inch stop log structure. This is the kind of water structure you have to have when you're going to manage large bodies of water. They work beautifully, but they're expensive. A structure like this will cost you, depending on the size, anywhere from $100,000 up to $500,000 each. But they last longer. Instead of a 6-inch by 8-inch board, you've got a 5-foot wide 4-inch board, and you have 3 bays. Those bays can be anywhere from 3 to 5 feet wide, depending on the size of the impoundment you're working on. And they have 4-inch aluminum stop logs that you can take one out and slowly drain, or you can flush the whole thing. If you get a backwater event during when you need to be worrying about the growing season, then you can pull all those boards and flush that thing and get back to square one. Having the flexibility to do that, it's been a game changer at Ballard WMA. So you saw that video, you saw the lotus. It's a pretty swamp, but it's just not a lot of duck food. When we put these new structures in, we were able to dry that thing out, put a little herbicide on the ground, and the very next summer, this is what that looked like. This is an entire impoundment full of Walter's millet. Walter's millet is a rare plant in Kentucky. We rarely see it. But we just took a 200 to 300 duck use day, that's per acre, 200 to 300 duck use days per acre of that lotus and buttonbush, and turned it into 3,000 to 4,000 duck use days. That's the amount of food that changed in that in just 1 year, being able to dry that thing out and release the seed bank. Back in November, we were there were probably 10,000 ducks using this impoundment, which is more than I've ever seen any November previous. And then just a few weeks ago, I was there, and there were still those 10,000 ducks, along with another 5,000 snow geese still feeding in this millet, and they still had not wiped it out. So we had, exactly the amount of food we need, the right kind of habitat. We got exactly what we wanted with that price tag. Again, that never could have happened without the partnership with Ducks Unlimited, without the grant funds available through the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, and then those private donors that get on board. Could not have ever done it. I mentioned that Ohio River pump that we want. We're working with DU engineers right now. I mentioned how slow state government is. Part of that is, as Fish and Wildlife, we have one engineer, and he's very capable of designing these things, but he's got boat ramps, he's got camps that he's got to worry about, every building the agency owns. Our engineers are swamped, and so it might take 10 years for us to be the next in line. So working with DU, they have a staff of engineers, and they can put their staff time into the pot and give us these plans that are plug and play. And when the grant funds come available, we throw money, private donors throw money, we have DU money coming in, and combined, we can make these things happen. So I'm going to stop talking about public lands work that we've done and move over to the private land sector. Generally, we only discuss WMA management, but since Kentucky is 90% privately owned, the department's always had, we've always spent a significant amount of staff time working with private landowners. Our small game program has had some huge wins targeting habitat on private land, but we've just never really done much with wetlands. We were lucky enough to be awarded the EQIP Focused Conservation Project in Ballard County a few years ago. Basically, this program is targeting landowners that have suitable soils to hold shallow water over winter during that migration period in the croplands of Ballard County. So to back up just a little, I'll tell you the backstory. About 3 years ago, this old retired guy from TNC named Jeff Soul, he was just bored, I guess, that day, and he stopped to talk to us. Jeff had an idea from when he actually worked with TNC before he became a professional bird watcher, but he just kind of wanted to stop back by and see if anybody was interested. He'd found some information out of a successful private land program in California and Arkansas in the rice country regions of those states. And basically NRCS was helping pay farmers to provide better migration habitat to wetland dependent species like ducks and other water birds. Obviously, Kentucky does not have a giant rice region, but we did see some potential. So the take-home message from sitting down and talking to Jeff is we needed to find a way in Kentucky to incentivize farmers to try wetland management. So you remember that sounding board that I mentioned earlier in Ballard County? We talked to them. It's like, hey, what do y'all think? And they said, we've already been thinking of this. all our neighbors that aren't already doing some duck management, the potential they have, how can we get them on board? That was the sounding board members' question. And so we said, well, let's just sit down and talk. And they had the same concerns as us. You know, they knew that it is more lucrative to have a duck management business than it is to try to farm a wetland. You know, these farmers were trying to put corn out in cropland that's going to go underwater, you know, at least twice in 5 years, and they're still doing that. Well, you can sell duck leases and still harvest your crop and make a lot more money than you ever could just farming it. So my first thought was maybe NRCS could help. Their programs have the most money, and our staff have always kind of leaned on NRCS to help get some of this money spread across the state. So we knew NRCS already had WRP. I spent the early part of my career in Kentucky working on WRP, but most of the producers in Ballard County weren't really ready to retire their land. You know, Kathy did a great job explaining what the WRP program, or WRE now, what it does. And that's, you know, they're restoring tomorrow's wetlands. Those things are protected permanently, but duck managers, they like to get in there and work with what they've got, and that doesn't fit the WRP needs. So we also had the CSP program. You know, that's something I'm not familiar with, and it was worth discussing. And then we had EQIP, which everybody in Kentucky on the wildlife side has worked with EQIP for quail and rabbit habitat for years, or timber work, but it's just not done much wetland work through the years. So the big question is, you know, what programs can we use? How do we go about getting it? So I set up a meeting with the state biologist and the program staff, the EQIP program staff in Lexington there for NRCS, and you know, basically said, is there anything y'all have that we can use to entice these farmers to try waterfowl management? You know, I'd hope to sell these farmers a plan designed to fit their crop rotation, but still provide migratory habitat to wetland dependent species as well. So my first thought, I'm kind of embarrassed to say it, but my first thought was to jump on that CSP bandwagon. But I quickly learned that nobody really understands that program, and it's underutilized in Kentucky. So I wasn't going to make much headway. But I thought, hey, if I can, you know, get one of those incentive payments or enhancement activities, whatever they call them, that would, you know, basically pay for somebody to do wetland wildlife habitat, we could put that tool in the toolbox. If you ever come across the right landowner, you've got it. That was my goal. Not very ambitious, but hey, there it was. So as we're talking to the state biologist, told Casey, he's like, well, you're in, you know, we might have another option for you. The new state conservationist at the time, he had a new vision for the EQIP program, and that's when I learned about those focused conservation projects. So a focused conservation project is generally, it's just EQIP, but they use local influence to prioritize where in the state EQIP money is spent. Each work unit manager, and that's an NRCS term, a work unit, you know, they would host a public meeting, and the farmers and entities within those work units come to these meetings and voice a need that maybe EQIP could potentially address. In our case, we had the need ready. We knew that we had some farmers over there that weren't trying wetland habitat, and we knew that they were interested, at least some of their neighbors were interested in doing more. So for our case, you know, we had the need, we just had to get them to the public meeting. So the meeting was scheduled. I put a little proposal and presentation together to go, you know, went to the meeting and presented what was our focused conservation project. In a nutshell, Kentucky has always had this practice that was wetland wildlife habitat management, but it was only available in their WRP or WRE program. It has never been offered in EQIP. But looking around at other states, I saw that it was a practice that you could use in EQIP. So I talked to Casey, the state biologist, and you know, said, hey, can we get this thing moved over into EQIP, and is there potential for us to use this in Kentucky? And the answer was yes. So basically what that means to the farmer is they would still be using their cropland. They would still have their corn, bean, whatever their rotation is, but we will be paying them to put some water on that cropland and leave it there during the migration period. You know, we would schedule the watering and dewatering dates, but everybody that got into the program would at least have to hold water through at least March 15th. Historically in Ballard County, that did not happen. When duck season ended, the last day of January, or the youth hunt happened, if you hosted a youth hunt, as soon as that was over, they were pulling boards, they were draining their wetlands, and they were getting ready to plant corn again. So they missed that critical period to get ducks back to the breeding ground in good enough condition to make eggs. So we also were able to throw in a ranking question that if you would hold water till April 15th and then add 1 year of moist soil management into your crop rotation, then that puts you at the top of the stack. And so to my surprise, almost every single application did that. So the next few slides here are what I pitched to the landowners, the landowner pitch as you hear. So the idea, let us pay for the water to be, the crop is the water, pay you to put water on your land for the birds. The crop is yours. You don't necessarily have to leave it standing. Now, if you're going to do duck management, if you want to sell duck leases, if you want to have, a high-end duck club or at least a high-end hunting hole, then you leave your corn standing for the ducks, and then after duck season, you harvest it. But for these farmers that have never tried this, we don't mind if they harvest their crop. Yes, flooded corn is great for mallards, but you take a flooded bean field that's already been picked and you show me some better shorebird habitat. I mean, that's absolutely perfect. When you've got some 1 and 2 inch water going across a bean field with no stubble in the way, the shorebirds love that stuff. So the water was our crop, specifically shallow water. We're talking, 3 to 18 inches as our target range. And we'd pay them to do that. So the benefits, I was pitching to those guys, we're going to create hunting opportunities. Ducks need high energy food. In Kentucky, flooded corn is the king of high energy food. Moist soil, that's what we pitch on our WMA because that's that's kind of the healthy salad bar, the healthy meal versus just the candy. But when it's cold, you need flooded corn. And that's what hunters like to sit in. So we got a great place, to watch wildlife, blah, blah, blah. We're going through the pitch, right? Well, not only that, NRCS will build the levees just like they do in WRP. Anything that you need, you will be paid to do it. Kentucky, we have a smaller program. If you didn't want to go through the NRCS engineering process, we have a much smaller program, but it's basically a 50% cost share program. And then you could also go through us. But the crux of the matter is you had to be able to manage the water. You had to be able to put it on and not put it on, but capture it in the fall and let it out after March 15th. So I mentioned the engineering. I showed, NRCS will come out, we'll design these things, help you build them. And then after a 3-year payment, the hope is that you continue doing this on your own. So it's it's kind of like cover crop. NRCS will pay people to try cover crop for 3 years in the hopes that after the 3 years is over, they see enough benefit at their bottom line to continue doing that. And that's what we're doing with this program. There are habitat manipulation practices that if you need to add in, we'll pay for. But the big thing is we just want you to try duck management, and we'll give you a really good paycheck to do it. So here was our first timeline. We asked for about $300,000 a year. And for the first 3 years, and then 100,000 each year after for just cleanup years or whatever, and we end up spending our entire 5-year budget in 2020. So $890,000 were spent in Ballard County, put 780 acres on the ground. The following year, we did another 650,000. I think total we're up to somewhere around 1,450 acres of wetland of managed managed wetland on a cropland, however you want to put that. But it's paying these farmers to flood crop fields. We also spent nearly $100,000 on new dikes and levees. So we had some big successes out there. We still have landowners on the books. This is our last year, hopefully, to wrap up who's signed up, and then the plan is to move on to the next place. We've got some farmers that have asked about moving this up the Ohio River towards Birdsville Island area. I'd like to go down to the Fulton County area. I'd love to go to Henderson Sloughs. The Sloughs WMA, there's a lot of duck hunters surrounding Sloughs WMA. I think we could have some big impacts there to get them to try to manage their waterfowl. And, that's another place where those hunters, they've been waiting on the Canada geese for the last 20 years. They just don't come anymore. So let's try to get them to pay these farmers to try some duck management. So we had huge success, but the last couple of years and with the future projections of those big structures, I showed that front slough structures. We've got 2 or 3 other lakes on Ballard WMA that we're hoping to get put in the next 5 years, plus that $4 to $5 million big river pump. And when it's all said and done, we're going to spend more than $10 million in Ballard County for waterfowl management. So that is the crux of the Wetland Kentucky waterfowl initiative, and I think I have stopped with enough time